Durham University. It's, let's say it's an annex of Yorkshire for this presentation. The north of England has been a powerhouse in terms of industry, but also power generation. So much of the latter half, at least the latter half of the 20th century, a lot of the very large-scale power stations in the country were powered from coal. Large power stations are at the end of their life, or are they? As coal is phased out, what replaces it? So where does Yorkshire fit into the plan for future energy? Well, other than coal, it has got some other resources. There's the map on the far left-hand side there is a map of the solar irradiation of the UK. Yorkshire doesn't have a great deal of solar irradiation, but nevertheless it can be used, and that will be touched upon later. Geothermal heat. Actually, Yorkshire is, apart from the south coast of England, Yorkshire has the best geothermal resource on the island. And although that's not utilised in the same way that it is in places like Iceland and New Zealand, volcanic geothermal energy, ground source heat pumps can benefit from that ground heat, and I think that's going to be talked about later. The wind resource, well, we know it can be windy up here, and Simon's going to talk about that shortly. Energy crop yields. Well, we know a lot of North Yorkshire is agricultural, and there is potential for agricultural land to be used for growing energy crops, which I'll discuss. And then at the far right hand side here, perhaps the more controversial issue of the evening is going to be talking about shale gas, because we have significant shale gas, or potentially have significant shale gas resources in the region. Whichever energy source you prefer, it's certain that someone disagrees with you. So this slide is there to illustrate that whatever you choose, it's going to upset someone.
We're going to talk about energy in relation to Yorkshire. That's the theme of this evening. But when it comes to wind, just be aware that that is a national resource. I'm sure you know this anyway now, but here we are, Gridwatch. Hands up if you've seen Gridwatch before? Yeah, most people in the room here. So it's the consequence of living in a democracy. So every 5 minutes the national grid put up here for your electrical energy, how much you're using and where it's coming from. So at the moment we're using 42 gigawatts of electricity. Domestically, industry-wise, the whole ball of wax grouped together, of which about 6% is coming from wind here. So it's contributing, at the moment, it's not particularly windy. This gets up to, it can be between 15 and 20%. In the UK, we have more offshore wind installed capacity than any other country globally. So we've got about 5 gigawatts at the moment. Germany keeps threatening to overtake us, they're not quite there. We're world leaders in terms of offshore wind, and why is that? Because we've got this great asset called the North Sea. I'm going to talk specifically about wind energy tonight, and so we better talk about, for those of you who haven't been involved in the industry, what a modern wind turbine is. So here is my attempt in one slide. So we all know, there's lots of them around here, this is what they look like. Why do they look like that? Well, that is, if you go back 25, 30 years to where it all started, the horizontal axis Danish 3-bladed wind turbine, that's what we started out with when it was a kilowatt scale device. The biggest wind turbine you can go and buy now in the world is the MHI Vestas 8 megawatt wind turbine, and it looks exactly the same as that. So all they've done is upscale a very young industry. There is opportunity for transformational ideas in the wind space. You know, why we drive past a wind farm, you do it now on the way home, look at one. I'll guarantee you, maybe you've only got 5 or 6 turbines in the wind farm, and one of them won't be going round. And why is it not going round? Because something's tripped, and you're waiting for the technician to drive up in the white van and climb up the tower and work out that it wasn't that serious after all, and just flip the switch and off it'll go again. Okay, do you really want to do that when it's 100 miles offshore? Why are we building big arrays of one monopile with maybe 20 smaller wind turbines all mounted off the one structure? So if you have a problem, it's only you've still got 19 out of the 20 working. Unfortunately, the wind doesn't always blow, so they only generate when the wind's blowing, and they don't always go round at some divisible number of 50 times a second. So we have 50 hertz electricity here, so if you're going to drive a generator from that, you need something that allows you to generate 50 hertz electricity in the generator when the blades are going round at really any speed it likes. So the way it's done for the most part, on most designs, most of the ones you see out there, you have the blades that drive a shaft through a gearbox. So the gearbox takes a relatively low speed shaft that the blades are mounted on and converts it into a high speed shaft coming out the gearbox, and you then use that to power an induction generator and produce electricity. How does it work then? Basically they all have a power curve like this. So this is a 1 megawatt, which is power here, that's a megawatt. So this is wind speed, 10 metres a second, 15 metres a second. So at low wind speeds, as the wind starts to blow, the turbine, you need to get up to about 5 metres a second here before the turbine starts to do anything. It then starts to generate. It generates increasing amounts of electrical output power up until about, in this case, about 13 metres a second, and then you start pitching the blades. So you start turning the blades to restrict the amount of power it produces to keep it at a megawatt in this case, so that you don't overstress the whole system. And that's okay up to wind speeds of about 25 metres a second. And then once you get beyond that, the loads on the structure are getting so great that you really don't want the blades going around at all. So you pitch them so that it's generating no power, and it sits there and weathers the storm out. If you add up everything, all the wind, all the gas, all the nuclears, you've got about 80 gigawatts of electric power generating plant in the UK at the moment. Peak demand something around 45 gigawatts typically within a day. Okay, how much of that could we generate from wind? Well, there's about 5 gigawatts of onshore wind. Sorry, 8 gigawatts of onshore and 5 gigawatts of offshore wind. That is set to rise massively in the next 5 to 10 years. And it's cheap. Already, you can generate electricity at £65 a megawatt hour from onshore wind turbines. That's typically the number. If you remember Hinkley C, when the government fixed the electricity price from that, £92.5 in over a decade's time before anything's going to come out of that. So already onshore wind is about 2/3 of that cost. I want to say a little bit about offshore. Offshore wind farm look like? Well, the government have Crown Estate released the development rights in 3 phases for offshore wind, 1, 2 and 3. Phase 1 was, can we actually get it to work? So if you go up to Blythe and see there's a couple of turbines 40 metres offshore, that was around one site. That went well. So then we had round 2, so this is the largest of the round 2 sites, the London Array. If you're flying to Heathrow and coming down the Thames, you fly over it if you look out the window. So there it is on the map. This is a picture of it, that's a substation, so all of these turbines connect to this substation here, and then there's a cable that runs back to, or 2 cables actually, in case somebody trawls it and breaks it. 2 cables that take the power back to shore. 175 Siemens 3.6 megawatt wind turbines.
I'll tell you about shale gas and oil, and just as background, let's remember that about 3/4 of our energy comes from fossil fuels in the UK. About 1/3 of our energy comes from gas. The fracking technology has been around for a long time, as it says there, at least since 1940. And what this is, basically, is injecting high pressure water with sand and some chemicals in order to increase the rate at which, to create little fractures and to increase the permeability, the rate at which gas or oil can be produced from these wells. The real breakthrough in technology technology has been applied with directional drilling, and that's really the key thing. So, not to scale over here, but these wells typically would go at least 1 kilometre, typically 2 or 3 kilometres underground, injecting the high pressure water and sand, and you are cracking the rock apart. The way it works, the way it works best in the US, and that's basically where all the action is to drill multiple wells from one site. So that's what it looks like during the drilling process. So there's water tanks here. So a few million gallons of water are used for each frac. That has to come from somewhere. Here in the UK, we might be able to pipe that in. In some places, it's stored. There's some polymer sometimes added. There are some chemicals, small amounts of biocide, for example. There is sand, because what the water do when you create those fractures, you want to prop the fractures open. You don't want them closing up, and they do close up actually quite quickly, which is quite a big issue. So that's actually what it looks like, and of course you need a lot of pumps, and so you need some pretty meaty pumps in here in order to pressurise that water. So then they need to be on site for the appropriate period of time. How long does it take to drill one of these wells? Maybe something like 6 months. If you're going to drill multiple wells from one site, so 6 wells, that might be 2 or 3 years. So that's the kind of time period you're talking about for drilling. And of course, that's the great thing about fossil fuels. The energy density is so high, so the surface footprint is for the amount of energy you get is extremely small. I wouldn't maybe go so far as to say it's transformational in the US. But look at that number up there. They have drilled over the last 15 years 280,000 wells. These are absolutely eye-watering amounts of activity. And again, the details don't matter here, but this is just simply an indication of how much either oil or gas, both are produced depending where you are in the US. Does it matter? Has it mattered to the US? Absolutely. So here is a graph then where all you really need to look at is that anything below the line, that is the US importing petroleum, oil or gas on average, and anything above the line means that they are net exporters, and this is from 1949 to kind of today. This is basically shale, and the US now has become a net exporter of petroleum. So that Yorkshire indeed, through the Bowland Shale, is indeed one of the areas of the UK, the sort of northern swathe of England, from sort of Blackpool across to Hull and to Teesside. And those are the licences. These are actually some of the old licences, and the ones in brighter colours are the ones which were licensed a year or so ago. I actually had a look to see what those licences actually were, because a licence does not mean you can go in and frack next week. Most of these licences are actually exploration. It means they're going to shoot some seismic to see what's underground. There are some wells planned, and I saw that there's maybe 3 or 4 wells which they were hoping to actually, various companies were hoping to frack over the next period of time. What do we need to do to make a difference to the UK? And so, depending on your perspective, what's the prize economically, or how much damage is there going to be to the local environment? There's a lot of data in the US now, so we can take production data from the US, we can transport it across here. The geology is a bit different, we don't know how well the wells will work, but if we take a decent US well, we know what the production profiles are, and these are the kind of production profiles you've got. You can't read this, but this is from 1 to, this is I think 48 months, so this is the 4-year production. The issue with these wells is that the rate of gas production declined very, very quickly. So after 3 years, you've lost about 80% of your production rate. Economically, that means the companies have got to keep on drilling. So if we drill 3,000 decent US wells over a 10-year period, and I've suggested there that maybe that would be 6 per pad, so 500 pads, 500 football fields, that's what it would look like at the end. And if they work like decent US wells, not the best, not the worst, but sort of decent ones, after 10 years, that would equate to about 30% of our annual consumption of gas. So that's the kind of the potential price which is actually out there. We've gone from self-sufficiency to 80% over about a 15-year period. So this could replace some of it if it works and we go on to that kind of scale. So those are the numbers, those are the issues that we need to talk about as a
biomass? Well, actually biomass covers a really wide range of materials. Essentially all biomass is what is either living or recently living matter on the surface of the earth. So that mainly includes, in terms of what we use as an energy resource, that's mainly wood. But of course it also includes other materials such as agricultural residues like straw. There's also materials which are grown specifically for crops which are grown specifically for energy purposes, such as miscanthus and willow. But then also a lot of the stuff that we generate as waste materials are also biomass. So waste wood, of course, municipal solid waste is substantially biomass, or it's also got plastics and petroleum products in there as well. And then the photograph down there on the bottom right is that's another waste product that we produce, and that's sewage sludge, by the way, and that's also a resource for generating electricity. So how do we convert biomass into electricity or harness the energy? Well, there's a number of ways. Anaerobic digestion is a commonly implemented means of converting biomass into a usable fuel, and that could be all sorts of waste materials, agricultural waste materials, sewage sludge, manure from the farm, waste animal feeds and so forth. And in fact, in recent years, anaerobic digestion plant has become popular. Another thing you can do is you can heat up your biomass in an oven in the absence of oxygen, and that converts the material into a different sort of gas. This is similar. This is actually like a syngas, so it's carbon monoxide and hydrogen. So this is similar to how town gas used to be made from coal back in the olden days. And in fact, that's what before we had natural gas distributed, then town gas was a similar thing. And then the really big stuff, you might recognise, this picture is of a power station I mentioned earlier. This is Drax Power Station, the largest in the country, in North Yorkshire, the bit of North Yorkshire which is substantially south of here. And Drax Power Station consists, in fact Simon mentioned earlier, it consists of 6 units, each of them is 660 megawatts each, so its total capacity is 4 gigawatts. The large power stations like Drax and Ferrybridge and Ratcliffe and Cotton and so forth, these are big power stations built by the CGB in the 60s and early 70s. And they're based on very similar designs. It's pulverized, they were based on burning pulverized coal. Now to convert them to biomass, but what they've done is they've taken wood or other biomass, milled it into a pulverized fuel, into a fine powder, and then they just put it through the burners in the same way that they do with coal. Why burn biomass? Why not just rely on wind energy? But biomass is essentially a renewable resource. That doesn't mean to say it's carbon neutral, and it doesn't mean to say that it's instantaneously renewable. The point is, it is renewable. Burning biomass instead of coal is advantageous because it means that we offset putting the carbon that's buried in the ground in fossil fuels. We're stopping that from going into the atmosphere, and the carbon that is emitted when we burn biomass, because when you burn wood, it does convert to CO2, among other things, that goes into the atmosphere. But the principle is that the carbon dioxide that is released is captured in regrowth of the resource that you're using. If we're using this in the same way as we use coal at the moment, we can use it as on-demand the power output from these power stations can be controlled and in accordance with what the demand is. So this graph here shows there's two things. There's the UK electricity demand in black, which is basically that's a daily cycle. You can see it's like a daily, almost like a sine wave. And then the red line underneath is the generation from wind. And there's no correlation between when the wind blows, the wind just blows when it blows. There's no correlation between when that energy is available and when you actually need it. The point about having conventional power fired by biomass is that you can switch that power on demand when you need it. What will these look like in the landscape? I've just put this slide up just to show that power stations don't have to be the brutalist architecture of the past. The one on the top left is the recycling and energy recovery facility in Leeds, run by Veolia, which is really actually quite a pleasant looking building, and it's even got a garden growing up one side. Then the orange building, that's in Blackburn Meadows in Rotherham. There's also an artist's impression of a bioenergy plant on Teesside in the bottom left-hand side there. And then on the bottom right-hand side, those are the biomass storage domes at Drax. So the architecture of these buildings doesn't have to be as brutal as it was in the past. Where do we get the biomass from? Well, a lot of it comes from waste wood. This graph shows you how the growth of the use of biomass in energy generation has grown over the past few years. But you'll see that the significant change there is imported wood pellets. That's almost entirely Drax. Where did they come from? They come from North America. But contrary to what may be claimed in recent reports, the supply chain and the means of resourcing those wood pellets from North America is, at least ostensibly, it is sustainable.
So as Patrick said, I'm going to talk about small-scale heat and power. So these are technologies that actually any one of us in the room could be owners and operators of energy infrastructure. So as opposed to the three speakers that we've had previously, where they've been talking about centralised, large-scale energy infrastructure, we're going to talk about anything that could be implemented at the domestic or community level. Obviously, on the electricity side, we've got solar panels, either roof-mounted, or we can now get tiles, so they can be integrated into roofs. Or at a slightly larger level, you could have a sort of community-owned solar farm. Tends to be that at the household scale, you're looking at 4 kilowatts peak systems, and obviously it can be large community-owned schemes. Wind turbines, but obviously much smaller than the type that Simon was talking about, so micro scale here, so either roof-mounted, sort of 1 to 2 kilowatts, or pole-mounted, like the example there, where we've got sort of 5 to 6 kilowatts. We shouldn't forget heat. So when we tend to think about how we're going to change our energy systems, we always think about what can be done on the electricity side, but heat, it accounts for more than 40% of our energy use in the UK, and also accounts for 30% of our greenhouse gas emissions. So if you want to think about a transition of energy systems, we have to think about heat as well. We do have options for small-scale technologies that offer us heat. So we've got solar thermal, which obviously similar to solar PV, but here we're heating hot water for use in the house instead of making electricity. In the middle there you've got, well, that's actually a wood burning stove, but we can also think here about biomass boilers. Or we can start to think about systems that help us heat our homes, such as ground source heat pumps and air source heat pumps. So we can start to integrate these into systems in our households, as well as thinking about energy efficiency measures as well. So I thought it'd be worth just showing some of the sort of costs and benefits of these technologies. And this day I've taken from the Energy Saving Trust. So I've just got some data here on costs for different types of systems, and you can see there's always a range. That range is obviously going to be, costs are going to be dependent on the size of the system that you're able to implement, which is going to be related to things like size of your roof, or how much space you have if you're intending to put in a heat pump. Also, the variation depends on what heat source you might be moving from. So for example, You'll save a lot more money with a ground source heat pump if you're moving away from electric or coal heating. But if you're moving from a gas central heating system, you're going to save less money because gas is quite an economical way of heating your home. We've got some savings costs here, and those numbers sort of add up to sort of payback periods where you're looking at maybe 20 years to regain your investment. But usually if we think of technologies, if they're hitting sort of the 10-year mark payback period, that's sort of reasonable. And I've also shown here some of the CO2 savings. I wanted to show this scenario as a particularly optimistic scenario for what our energy system could look like if we really went for decentralised energy technologies in a big way. So this is some research from a research consortium called Realising Transition Pathways, and they were looking at different scenarios for our future energy system. And they outlined this scenario called the 1,000 Flowers Pathway, which is characterised by a much greater role for civil society. So this is not only domestic energy infrastructure and community, but also local authority-led investment in small-scale renewable technologies. And running their scenarios based on this massive uptake in civic society-owned energy, they found that perhaps 50% of final electricity demand could be met using distributed generation by 2050. So as I say, I think this is fairly optimistic, but what it does is make you think about what that transition would mean. So in order for us to do that, we would have to radically rethink our energy markets, we would have new actors in the system, we'd have to think about new governance and policy to manage that. We would have to have supporting technologies, we'd have to have energy storage technologies, smart grids, these kind of things. What I hope to have shown is that actually if we think about small-scale technologies not just as being there to provide energy, which we might see more of, but it's always going to be limited. But if we start to think about the other benefits that we can start to accrue by taking a different approach to energy provision, by bringing in new local actors and by doing things a little bit differently, we might start to see more of these opportunities. Lower bills, reduced carbon emissions, community cohesion.
I've actually got 3 questions. I'll do it in reverse order, starting with Catherine. Have you considered, you talked about solar PV and solar thermal. What you didn't mention was the integrated solar PV, solar thermal units that are available, which give you both from the same thing without doubling the capital cost, and improve the efficiency of the PV electrical generation by keeping the temperature controlled. And one of the firms that makes them is in County Durham.
When you say that bringing biomass from the US is sustainable, are you factoring in the energy usage for shipping it?
Yeah, the studies that look at the what's called the life cycle analysis of the energy requirements for the whole system, if you like. So that includes the transport costs and so forth. That does factor in all those things, and in fact, surprisingly, the energy requirement for shipping several thousand tons or tens of thousands of tons of pellets in a shipload across the Atlantic is considerably less than it would be to bring train loads of the same material down from Scotland. The energy cost of shipping is very low, mainly per ton of material, mainly because you can put so much material into a ship and bring it across.
That argument, or those sort of questions, apply to really any of these things. You think of wind turbines, okay, the fuel is carbon free, but you've still got to build the thing, you've got to install it, you've got to maintain it, and what it has just, for the first time, started to happen off Denmark with an offshore wind farm, you've got to decommission it. All of which have a carbon footprint.
I don't know if you're aware of the kind of reaction to the biomass collection in the United States. The communities are there find it offensive in the way in which these forests have been effectively, they say, raped. Do you know much about the certification method? You used the word sustainable, which I found rather disturbing, because the method used is a self-certification system by the forestry groups involved. which legally leads to deep vested interests who simply go out and collect wood, which is then pelletized and brought to the UK. I think that's appalling.
I mean, I'm not here as an advocate for the system or to defend it. I'm here to, we're here to explain what these systems are and what they can do. So that's a very valid concern. The existing system by which Drax gets its pellets, gets the wood from the US. These come from existing managed forest, comes from existing managed forestry, and they have standards which they apply to monitor and ensure sustainability. Now, I don't work for Drax, and I don't know what the details of those standards are, but that is what we are told. I agree with you that it's a concern if the regulatory framework in the US is not robust enough to stop irresponsible deforestation. That is not what it's about, though. It is perfectly possible to remove or to harvest the amount of biomass that you need for these applications without causing damage or deforestation using existing, well-proven forestry management techniques. So,
there was a report on the BBC last night about what is possibly the last hydropower coming on stream in the Calder Valley because the government have cut all the subsidies for renewable energies. Could you, each of you, just give us some idea of whether you're getting a good renewable energy price?
Well, the idea of a subsidy should really be to incentivise the development of new technologies, shouldn't it? And that's what we are, in a way, that's what we're paying for in offshore wind. The numbers I gave, the price has dropped from £143 a megawatt hour to less than 100. Still not competitive, still needs to come down a lot more than that. But there is no way the industry would have got to where it is now if it wasn't for government subsidies. So they have their place.
So just to say something on the solar side, costs have come down considerably for panels. So I think they're about 30% of what they were a few years ago. So it's fair that the feed-in tariffs should digress to reflect that decrease in cost of the technology. But I think the bigger issue is the instability in the policy arrangements. So for example, Leeds City Council were looking at a scheme of investing in thousands of solar panels on their community council-owned stock, and that had to be pulled at the last minute because of the change in feed-in tariff, and they'd done all that planning work to get to that point. That's a lot of wasted local authority time and resources. I had heard as well that last year more jobs were lost in the solar industry than the steel industry, and I haven't fact-checked that myself, but I'm now seeing nods, so that sounds reasonable. So we should start to think about jobs from these industries as being as important as the steel and those traditional jobs where, quite rightly, these things are lobbied for in government, but jobs in this industry are as valid. I think the renewable heat incentive is under consultation. I'm not sure what's happening there, but these things change quite quickly. I think the biggest issue is actually the removal of the Green Deal and there being no current incentives for energy efficiency measures, which is, from my point of view, no-brainer. Energy efficiency measures gives us jobs, it reduces everybody's bills, and we don't have any current national policy to support that side of things.
Andrew, you said that climate change is one of those things that's always there. I mean, it's a bit more than always there, isn't it? It's creeping up on us. I'd be interested to know your views on what would be the fastest way for us to decarbonise, and if we're going to get to meet the government targets of 80% reduction in emissions by 2050. And if we can do that as fast as possible, what would you say was the best strategy for us here in Yorkshire to play our part?
Controversial, change our lifestyles, use less energy ourselves, because we don't talk about that. But if that's not going to change, there's no silver bullet, clearly, absolute silver bullet. And there's a very nice study, for example, by the Royal Academy of Engineering a few terms of what we would need to do to cut by 80% by 2050 and to maintain our lifestyles pretty much as they are now, what you would actually need in terms of new nuclear, new wind, new solar, and I can't remember the exact numbers, but it's a lot of all of those. And I think that's feasible. I mean, back to the engineers, it's very feasible, it's also very expensive. So at the same time, we also have the issue of fuel poverty, which you mentioned as well, with already 10% of people in fuel poverty now. It's probably going to increase in the next X years. So that's the balance. But I don't think there's any there's no single way forward.
Just do something that meant we could have some more joined up thinking, then I think we could do a lot better than we do at the moment. So, for example, we've run ahead with wind, which I've been talking about, and what I have never been able to understand and still can't is why is the wind industry not champions for energy storage as well? You've seen all the variability of supply there. All the investment in energy storage is going into batteries principally because of transport. Everything you see in terms of the way the energy system's changing, whether it's on the demand side, with smart metering coming in at the domestic level, up to new mechanisms for having large aluminium smelting works turn off at periods of high demand. On the generation side, we're forging ahead with Hinkley C, so we're building new gigawatt scale nuclear plants, whilst at the same time getting interested in incentivising people to put photovoltaics on their roof. Storage, we're doing batteries, we're doing the small scale stuff, but there's no investment in the Norwick or compressed air energy storage schemes, which we could do in North Yorkshire, Teesside area. The salt caverns are already there. If we did that, then we could, the deployment of wind could increase massively, because we'd be able to have a more variable supply if we could store it at peak generation times.
I don't think I can answer this question, but I actually set that as a question for my second year students and asked them to use the government's 2050 calculator to look at the options. If you haven't used this tool, then it's worth doing, because actually it's really quite difficult to meet the 80% target, even if you ramp up all our technologies to the maximum technical feasibility. And what they found, and I agree with, is that you have to go to demand as well. And this is what Andy said. Unless we think about the demand side, we're not going to make it. We tend to come at this, especially from the engineering side, by saying, what do we need to supply? Let's supply it. But we've got to start thinking about how we reduce the demand and reduce the infrastructure we need. And I think the other critical thing is we need to start thinking about co-benefits. So the International Energy Agency did a piece of work, I think it was a couple of years ago, about what are the cost savings to the health sector if you implement energy efficiency measures. And the numbers were actually huge. But obviously we're not able to have a conversation in this country about how NHS budgets might be improved by spending some money in the energy sector, because it's just not how our government works. But if we could do more of those things and try to get towards those co-benefits, then we would want to do the carbon stuff, because it helps us with other things.
I'd like to just comment on this issue of whether wind and storage makes sense to sort of complement one another. I think storage certainly would work well with some renewable technologies, such as tidal power, where you've got a 4 times a day sort of fluctuation in a predictable output. But I don't really see storage being economic with something like solar or wind, where you can have several days where you've no output from the source. The big hydro pump storage schemes in North Wales and Scotland were designed really to even out the daily fluctuations from the big nuclear stations that were built at the same time. And to my way of thinking, it doesn't really make sense to try and use storage alongside a type of intermittent generation such as wind or solar, where you can end up going for maybe a whole week with very little output. It just makes it very, you need a lot of capacity, and it makes it very expensive storage. To get to the question I really was wanting to ask was, according to press reports, the company that runs Drax Power Station is planning to build 4 open cycle gas turbine plants around the country to complement the wind and solar that are giving these problems. Would it not be a lot more sensible to build combined cycle, the more efficient combined cycle gas plants, and just not bother with the solar farms, particularly, which are only sort of 9% effective, and
turbines can be probably about the most efficient way of converting fossil fuel to power, and that's the way we should go. And you know, one of the slides I put up earlier, we are going to be dependent on gas, you know, in the energy mix for many decades to come, and you know, using it efficiently is very important. So you know, I agree with your sentiments on that.
I'd like to comment with my wind hat on. I'm supporting my sponsor. You know, I obviously have a different view on the benefits of linking storage and wind together. You know, obviously it's true what you say, that tidal is more controlled and better known when you're going to have the energy available, and not solar to some extent as well, is not to quite the same extent. Wind, yeah, it's only there when the wind blows. You do have weather forecasting, so you have some forewarning of when you are going to have it and when you're not going to have it, so you can plan for it. That's something that people often forget. There is also a bit of a link between when your energy demand is going to be highest, i.e. periods of bad weather. That's often when the winds blow, or that's usually when the winds blow strongest, so there's a sort of natural link between the two. And it's not as simple as, I think when I said we'd be more joined up thinking earlier on, I think we have to get out of thinking in isolation about wind and electricity and just storing the electricity. You know, we all
small scale, but I understand like the Germans are actually producing hydrogen gas from wind, so they've taken the fossil fuel element out of that, hydrogen, whatever the scientific word is. But I feel that, you know, we've got a government who is, as you've all said, is completely not joined up thinking, because on the one hand we're supposed to be reducing our carbon emissions, and we've got the huge threat of climate change, and the idea is that we're not supposed to be tapping into new resources of fossil fuels, and shale gas is a new fossil fuel, and it isn't going to be offset by us importing less, because where the conventional hydrocarbons are flowing now, they're not going to turn the taps off because Britain decides to frack and find some shale gas. And then at the same time, I mean, we have a home that has an air source heat pump, so we keep saying, oh, well, we need gas to do all this domestic heating and things like that. But why are we not building houses that are better insulated, have air or ground source heat pumps, so that we actually can start to generate electricity to heat more than relying on gas? And accepting your comments, perhaps we all have to learn to pay more for what we use and use less. But it's scandalous to me that this government is saying, yes, we're serious about climate change, let's go frack.
Particularly on the issue of why aren't we building more energy efficient homes with more energy efficient technology? And I agree with you, it goes back to my previous comment that the cost of energy doesn't make that economical. It's easier for a house builder to build a cheap, poorly insulated house and sell it to someone who knows that they can afford to pay the bills. But if it was more expensive, then those things would be built and there would be a market demand for them, and people would cut their energy use because it would be too expensive not to.
Is that what really frightens governments about energy is energy security. You know, we all know from the 70s anyway, the lights go off and the governments fall very, very quickly as a result of that. So I think behind closed doors, number one priority for our government is a secure and possibly sustainable energy supply. And yeah, you know, we all have to keep pushing, because the climate change side of things is a lower level concern than energy security, I believe.
There is a global glut of gas, and in that context, we don't need to frack. Energy security it's a really interesting question, and I think if you lived in Poland or Bulgaria or Ukraine, you might have a different view on that. It hasn't been an issue here. We import lots of gas from Norway. That's politically very stable, but nobody lives there. We've got lots of gas. Qatar's the other place where we get our liquefied natural gas. That's got a pretty high carbon footprint because you have to compress it and bring it across. So the climate impact of importing fossil fuels is greater than doing it ourselves, and then there's also the economic side of it as well. So if we produce it ourselves, then that's cheaper than bringing it in, or it's our own economy. So they're probably the benefits in terms of gas. I mean, 80% of our homes are heated by gas. That is not going to go away in the next few years, and so we do need a source of gas over the next decades. I don't think you can get away from that. Do we need to also do the other things you're talking about? Yeah, absolutely. It's not one or the other. But I don't think we should say no to fracking because we can get gas from somewhere else. We may want to do it ourselves. From a climate perspective, that's actually better than importing it.
We could still carry on as we were, and something upstream happens and we could decarbonise our electricity system, and none of us has to do anything different in our homes, pretty much. For heat, more than 90% of us have gas boilers. If you think of the distributed nature of heat infrastructure, you would have to go into each and every one of those houses and change something. We can't just change the centralised system for heat, which makes it much more difficult. Now, it's great that you've got an air source heat pump, and we need more of a mix. We need some heating from electricity, but we can't all switch to heat. So one of the challenges is that the peak demand for heat is 10 times greater than the peak demand for electricity in the winter. So you've got a much more variable nature of heat demand. And if we switched all of that over to the electricity grid, we wouldn't be able to do it. So we do need different approaches. I think one of the other options that is often overlooked is district heating. It has sort of poor connotations that's associated with communist countries, but done in the right way with local authority-led schemes, you can bring on waste streams of heat, different fuel sources, and in that way we start to sort of transition via different ways of doing things.
Fracking in particular leads to a boom and bust cycle. Boom, bust, clean up, move on. Wouldn't it simply be better to take that money, that investment being spent on developing fracking, to things like the community energy project, which Catherine was talking about, to help the transition off of fossil fuels? Why is this beyond the wit of man?
It's very easy in the energy debate to set up false dichotomies. It's like saying, why do that, why not do this? But I think the point is, with energy, is we don't really have much option but to try a bit of everything. So, with all due respect, I think the dichotomy that you set up there was not really necessarily, do we frack or do we improve our energy efficiency? We've definitely got to do the latter, and we may need to do the former. But it's not it's not necessarily in the energy debate. It's not necessarily do we do one of these or another one of these.
But let me just see something in your mind, and something which is attracting me at the moment is that in Northern England there is you mentioned actually geothermal potential. One thing which is basically hot water in the ground. It's quite interesting that geologically there are rocks which are quite closely associated with where the shale gas would come from, which would actually be a very useful geothermal resource. So something I'm quite interested in, and this is just completely out there, is that you actually use the money from the shale gas. The wells are drilled, and once they've died 10 years from now, you may be able to convert them to geothermal wells, and then get carbon-free heat, not power, heat, for a long period of time. Now, I don't know whether that's how feasible it actually is, but it's just an example of trying to use the economy, in that case the benefits of shale gas in terms of money, to seed something else.
I just wanted to say as well that I think to answer that question, we have to stop thinking about technologies and thinking about market structures as well. So fundamentally, all our suppliers make money by selling more units of energy, and unless you change that, there's no incentive ever to sell less units of energy. So we need innovation, not just in technologies. All these technologies help us, of course, get to supplying what we need, but we need to think about innovation and business models. So supplying energy, carbon tax, energy service companies, community, whatever it might be. All these different business models are are as important to us as the technologies we often talk about.
It's only the lady in the end who's actually really offered a real sustainable future, beyond economics, beyond anything else, a localised, regional energy system which will give us national independence, but also maybe regional independence, a real sustainability. The gentleman who mentioned wind, a low entropy system close to my heart, although it has problems with mining, with decommissioning, it is a sustainable system. It's a system which is getting better all the time, bringing cost savings all the time, going to give regions energy independence and sustainability. The gentleman who talked about biomass made some very good points that there is a sustainable agenda in there, will help build our bridge for the next 20, 30 years to keep the lights on. I'm afraid the gentleman talking about fracking has not mentioned methane, public health, so many really endemic problems of fracking regions, which mean it's a very, very large cost consideration if we do take public health in the mix. So personally, I'm out with you, but sustainability, I really think the lady at the end has made some very good points. So my point to you is sustainability, not economically, but an environmental energy bridge to a country in 50 years' time that has a sustainable energy system without fuel poverty, without government machinations. I mean, what is the best way forwards? I see low entropy energy systems as sustainable myself.
You're asking for there is not, for me, is even now, is not out of reach for 2050, but it requires this joined up thinking together.
I think where I would disagree with you is the idea that fossil fuels are deeply damaging to health. That I can't agree with. And if you look at the benefits that have come to this planet in the last 200 years in terms of health and wealth, they have been driven by fossil fuels. So yes, we need to change, but it's not true that they haven't delivered a huge amount of benefit to everybody in this room and beyond.
And your question about who is it that should be taking action, well actually it's every single one of us. All of us make choices every day that impact on how we use energy. We can switch suppliers, we can make decisions about how we use energy. Many of you, I guess, are homeowners, who we vote for, exactly. There isn't a single person in the UK that doesn't have some stake in our energy system and can't do something. If they think these things are important, all of us could do something. So it's worth considering our everyday action.